And good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, January 3rd, 2018, and it's 7:08, and I will call into session the Northborough School Committee, open meeting for January. And we're going to start with first item on the agenda, the action on the open meeting minutes of December 6, 2017.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the meeting minutes for December 6, 2017.
Second.
Any discussion, comments, concerns, adjustments? All in favor? And first item on, next item is the new business. And the first item under new business is the Mcas presentation. Assistant Superintendent Greg Martineau.
I can clear a room faster. So a lot has happened since last year's annual Mcas presentation. So this evening, my goal is to update the school committee on Mcas 2.0 and talk about the new assessment environment, share the spring 2017 Mcas results, answer any questions that you may have, and talk about this upcoming spring's assessment. So since it's been 25 years since education reform, so it's been almost a quarter of a century, which is hard to believe, and a lot has happened since ed reform took place. We've had educator evaluation, we had retail, new standards, and most recently in the past several years, there's been a shift in from Mcas 1.0 to the next generation Mcas. There's been revisions to the Mass, Ela, and math curriculum frameworks, as well as the science frameworks. And in upcoming years, the next generation assessment implemented for science, computer-based. Just recapping some of the changes to the frameworks. So in ELA, our teachers have done a great job shifting to what students are expected to know and do in ELA, and there's been a real shift from the text complexity, from fiction to nonfiction, more of a balance, from an emphasis on the different types of writing, from argument, informational, explanatory writing, and research, a shift from speaking and listening, reading and writing, and then literacy being taught across the standards in ELA. In math, we've seen a shift in coherence and clarity across the grade levels in terms of a progression of math topics. More of an emphasis on procedural fluency and conceptual understanding and more rigorous mathematical proficiencies across the grade levels. And then in science and technology engineering, more relevance in terms of the science organized around explanatory ideas that are connected to the real world, more rigor and coherence, and integrated literacy skills and standards in the science. And again, all of these new frameworks were linked to anchored in college and career readiness. So with these shifts in knowledge and skills, Mcas 1.0 is no longer really a valid assessment of how what students were expected to know and do. So there has been a gradual shift to a new assessment, Mcas 2.0, and the shift really has been the depth of knowledge kids are expected to show on this assessment, moving from remembering to more about applying, analyzing, and evaluating information and sources. So this year, students experienced the Mcas 2.0 in terms of the assessment that they took. So in grades 4 through 8, our students took a computer-based assessment. In grades 3 and 10, the assessment remained computer-based, paper and pencil. And this year we'll shift in grades 3 to computer-based. The Board of Elementary and Secondary Education placed an accountability pause because of the new assessment. We can no longer compare historical assessment data to the next generation MCAS achievement data. And then the 2017 next generation MCAS results will serve as a baseline for setting targets for 2018. So some of the changes from 1.0 to 2.0. The first is major change is paper-based to computer-based. MCAS 1.0, no universal accessibility, so accessibility features were not built in. Now, in this new computer-based environment, the tools available to all students are highlighters, zooming, magnification, audio, notepad, item eliminator, and they're not just available to a few students, but anyone using that environment. The other major change is the types of questions. Multiple choice remained, new questions, multiple select, evidence-based short response, and technology-enhanced open response questions were added. And then the last major change was the metrics used to talk about achievement moved from warning, needs improvement, proficient, and advanced to exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, partially meeting, and not meeting. So I thought I'd spend just a minute or two demonstrating what this new testing environment looks like for students. So we spent a lot of time, our teachers spent a lot of time with their students preparing them for this new environment. There were practice tests and practice experiences, so this wouldn't be the first time students engaged in an online assessment experience. So this is actually a demonstration of what students would experience. So we'll do an ELA practice test. We'll go to grade 3. So students would log into their environment. The directions would appear at the start screen. And then students would begin their assessment. The nice thing about the online assessment is that students can actually see the questions and tell whether they answered the questions or not. And they could answer the questions out of order. So they could move from, they could go to question 4, question 1. And it also gave students a tally of how many questions they answered and how many they didn't answer. They also could bookmark questions. So if they had a question they were stuck on, they could bookmark it and go back to it. In addition, there is a notepad so students can take notes as they answered questions. There's an answer eliminator, so for multiple choice questions they could eliminate answers, and that was a visual aid for students to use. And then lastly, those universal tools, so the magnifier, the line reader mask, and then finally exhibits. So if the particular question had any exhibits, graphics that the answer required, they would be listed in this area. So students basically, so this particular example, today you will read the story, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Pay close attention to the actions of the characters and the events in the story. Answer the questions to help you prepare to write a narrative story.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can they I saw a highlight on your accessibility slide. Can they interact? Can they do anything on the body of that text at all?
They can highlight,
But they can't really.
but they can't annotate.
Yeah,
No.
there's not like a little comment bubble or something where you can actually annotate in line.
No, they were, students were allowed to use as much scrap paper as they wanted to, so they could take notes as they were working on a particular.
Is the highlight feature just not in this example here?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So then, this is multiple choice, part A and part B. So again, the eliminator. Oops. they can eliminate as they move through. This is an example of a technology-enhanced question where they have to sequence the events in order. So it's a drag and drop. And I think what we found are students preferred this online testing experience more than they preferred the paper environment. This is an example of a narrative text. So today you will read the story, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Pay close attention to the actions. This question is a text-based essay question. Your essay should present and develop a narrative that uses details from the passage, include correct grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Write Derek's journal entry about this camping trip. Include information about the characters, how the characters responded to the events in the story as you write the journal entry. So using evidence from the text, taking perspective, and they were given the space to type their narrative.
Is that a character count in the upper right?
Yeah, so they have 5,000 characters.
Does it go as you...
Yep. So this is an example of next generation question where they're given two pieces, an article and a poem, and then they have to respond to questions comparing and contrasting the two pieces that they read. Here's the poem. There's some multiple choice questions. So based on the article and the poem, why do male penguins put their eggs and chicks on their feet? And they have access to both texts. And as you go, you can see it tells me how many questions I've not answered, how many bookmarks I have. And then when students were done the assessment, they would log out and be done the assessment. So I think the challenges that we faced was there was a lot of technology set up, a lot of pre-work that needed to be done by teachers and the technology department to make sure that the assessment environment worked well for students. So our technology department and teachers did a great job of preparing students and making sure that there were no glitches during the testing window that took place. So it was a much different testing experience for students, but overall I think the students thought the environment was a better environment for assessment. So in addition to different testing environment, one of the other major changes is the change in achievement metrics, moving from warning to needs improvement, proficient, and advanced, to different scaled scores and different metrics, from not meeting expectations all the way to exceeding expectations, with more descriptive detail around what each metric meant. What did remain the same from legacy Mcas was student growth percentile. So comparing our district and our schools to similar schools with similar profiles, performance. That gives us a comparison to like schools and how they performed over the past 2 years to how we performed over the past 2 years. So student growth was again a comparison that we can continue with. But the achievement levels, exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, partially meeting and not meeting, again, we couldn't compare historically. But what remains the same is that if we take those two metrics, achievement and SGP, it really paints the picture of performance in terms of how a district performed, a school performed, and a student performed. So this is kind of a legacy report or a graph that we would share with the school committee that showed progression of achievement over time. And again, this this type of achievement we're going to be building moving forward with the 2017 results. But again, historical reports are no longer valid in terms of comparing 2017 to 2016. So this is our 2017 ELA results. And the Commissioner of Education talked about how this is a much more rigorous assessment and that districts can expect that more than 50% of their students would fall in the performance areas of partially meeting expectations or not meeting expectations. And you can see at the state level, we had 51% following in those two categories. And in Northborough, we had 60% of our students scoring and exceeding expectations and meeting expectations, and 39% in partially meeting and not meeting expectations. So again, there's definitely room for growth, but compared to the state, students outperformed, in Northborough outperformed counterparts across the Commonwealth. So this is comparison of growth and achievement, and this is a chart that you've all seen. Basically, it's divided into 4 quadrants. These 2 parallel lines in between here, between 40 and 60, represents typical growth. So typical growth for SGP, and then typical achievement. And basically, we look at our growth percentile, which was 52, and then we look at our percent meeting expectations and exceeding, which was 77. And it puts us in the quadrant here of high achievement, high growth. And then if you compare Northborough to the rest of the state, you can see how we fared in ELA. A similar comparison in mathematics. So legacy report that is familiar to the school committee. 2017 math Mcas results. Northborough compared to the state. And again, we had 62% of students scoring exceeding and meeting expectations compared to 48% at the state level. 32% in partially meeting and 6% in the not meeting for Northborough, 41% at the state level, and 12% not meeting expectations at the state level. So again, Northborough students outperformed the state on a much more rigorous assessment. In terms of growth and achievement, so students in Northborough's SGP was 55, and achievement was 67. So 67% of students met or exceeded expectations. And again, where Northborough fell compared to schools across the Commonwealth. So I think it was definitely a benchmarking year for Northborough. We learned a lot in terms of the new testing environment. A lot of the work that we've done in preparing students for the rigor of the assessment has proven to yield results for Northborough students. And I think that, as we look forward, I think we're on the right track. I think year 2, we're much more prepared for the testing environment, and students have more experience. And the data continues to be a valuable resource for us. We get a tremendous amount of data from the state, and we disaggregate the data by subgroups. So we look at how students performed across, in terms of special education, gender, etc. And we use this data as a measure to drive improvement. We use this data to look at individual student performance. And we also triangulate this information with other local assessments that we give. This is just one measure amongst many measures that we use. We continue to align our curriculum and assessments to the changes that the state is making, as well as information and knowledge and skills that we think as a community students need to have. We're also focusing on increasing the rigor of our local assessments to align to what students are experiencing on this state assessment, and we continue to monitor the state assessment landscape. And I think it's important to note that, what continues to drive our improvement is a strategic plan that's been the guiding post for our work. This connects to the school improvement plans and really provides a beacon for the work that we do throughout our schools. And we've done a tremendous amount of work investing in curriculum resources, instructional practices, and making sure teachers have the professional learning that they need to be the best they can be in their classroom. So we're going to continue to provide professional development in strategic growth areas, utilize data to inform instruction, focus on research-based instruction, and focus on higher-order thinking. And I just want to end by complimenting the teachers across Northborough. They're outstanding. Although this is one measure, they do a fabulous job, and they're really the greatest resource that we have. And I'd also like to compliment the students. We're very fortunate to have great students to work with, and they really rose to the occasion. So at this time, I'd like to entertain any questions that the committee may have.
So will you be looking at specific areas where the district either, whether it's a certain grade that needs to improve with a certain skill, or at the school level, relative weaknesses?
Yeah, so we have
in detail.
We have item analysis data, so we can look at specific questions or specific types of questions at each school or across the district to see performance levels, and we use that data to hone in and to focus in on specific areas that we can improve on our curriculum for our instruction.
And how, in practice, how does that happen? Are you meeting with school leaders?
So principals have access to Edwin, which is a data analysis tool provided by the state. They generate reports and analyses which are provided to the teachers, who then meet in their grade level teams to drive instruction and decide on direction to go in terms of instructional practice.
One last question. Does this, in all that data the state provides us, do they show us how much the students are using those tools, like interacting with the...
No, so we don't have
the
data.
notepad or anything, so we can see if they're using the strategies and tools available?
We don't have any data. I think just anecdotal data from principals observing the testing environment and teachers. Students still used a lot of the paper, pencil note-taking, but I think it's still a new environment, and we're trying to make sure that what happens on a day-to-day basis in terms of instructional practice and what students are experiencing happens on a day-to-day basis, and it mirrors this testing environment. So.
Actually, one last question. Is there a new list of accommodations that has been provided by the state as far as students who require accommodations beyond the accessibility ones that were presented? And do they have to, is there still a paper option, or has that gone by the wayside?
So paper is still an option.
Is it?
And there is a list of accommodations that parallel the prior years' accommodations that have been provided to students.
I'm good, thanks.
I have several questions. Cut me off anytime. One of the things that I was concerned about, especially with last year, with being the first year, is the students getting enough practice on keyboarding skills. Because I'm thinking, especially at the lower levels, if they're still just trying to find the letters, their thought trend is being segmented. So are the students getting enough practice with the keyboarding skills to allow them to be proficient when they're trying to get their thoughts down onto the computer?
So one of the reasons we decided not to assess third grade computer-based testing was exactly for that reason, to provide more opportunities for students to get more comfortable with typing. So we do have experiences where students are practicing their typing skills, so that they are more proficient, and it isn't a barrier for them to demonstrate what they know on an assessment. So we are working on that in our curriculum, and students have different experiences at the different grade levels around typing.
Okay. On the third page, when you talked about the frameworks, assessment, accountability, it was the sixth slide, 1, 2, 3, 4, the sixth slide, and you talked about the third bullet, which was accountability pause. Can you
Yes.
explain that further? And then, as second part of the question is, does that mean that they were not identifying schools as a level 1, level 2?
Correct. So under No Child Left Behind, the state had to institute accountability measures. So the state of Massachusetts has levels 1 through 5 based on performance on the state assessment. But because of the new assessment, it's no longer a valid comparison from Mcas 2.0 to 1.0. So the state is in a process of recalibrating and re-identifying accountability measures, and is using 2017 results and 2018 results to come up with the new accountability measures for districts and schools.
So that when they take the test 2018 this year, they will not be compared to 2017.
They will be.
They will be.
The spring of 2017.
Okay.
These results, though.
These results will be. Okay. And, okay, they took care of that. And then on the seventh slide, comparing the MCAS 1.0 to 2.0, the growth metric on the left-hand side, second from the bottom, is there any difference between calling it a student growth percentile, the acronym stayed the same, and then calling it traditional?
So the
Transitional.
So the transitional. So the difference is the comparison is 2 years. So the first year is the legacy MCAS 1.0. The second year is MCAS 2.0. So that's why they call it transitional. So next year will be MCAS 2.0 compared to MCAS 2.0.
So only this year is it transitional?
Correct.
Okay. And one last one? May I?
Unacceptable.
Okay, I can stay quiet. My last comment is that I'd like to applaud the teachers and your technology staff. I think you did an outstanding job, and this is, like you said, is only one measure. And I think that it's great where our kids are, because it was a hard test. If you would compare this with the first MCAS, you go like, the first one was like piece of cake. We thought that was hard. This one here is so difficult because they're reading two passages at times and doing compare and contrast, and a lot of persuasion, a lot of their viewpoints, point of view into it, which was never in it before, according to the new standards. So I like to applaud the teachers. Thank you for a wonderful job, the principals, for allowing the time, because you do have to take out some time out of the curriculum to allow the students to practice this, to be familiar with it. And also the technology staff, because I think I asked the question last spring, were there any glitches in giving the test? Because there's a lot of manpower, there's a lot of things that can happen where kids may not be able to sign on, and you said that everything had progressed very smoothly. So there were a lot of hands on deck at that time when we do the testing. And I'd like to applaud all of you, Christine, give our congratulations to all the staff, everybody that worked together as a complete unit. So thank you very much.
Well said.
I think Joan asked one of my questions about the typing skills, which you might have already answered, but I also was thinking, when they take these practice tests, what type of feeling did you get as far as them teaching the navigation of the tool versus the actual content of the curriculum based? And was there what kind of progress or plan for enhancing a tech curriculum, like the typing and all that is in place? You may have already answered this, but
No, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think we wanted to make sure that students had experience in the testing environment.
Right.
So logging in, making sure they were familiar with the tools and so forth. But we've done a lot of work in investing in our technology curriculum. For example, our math curriculum has technology tools that parallel the tools that they use in the online environment. So Pearson realized the math program that kids are using on a day-to-day basis is almost identical to these types of tools. So we're making sure that, again, the day-to-day experiences are aligned to what kids will experience in the testing environment. And we still need a lot of work in the area of preparing students. And I think as we move from a 2-to-1 to 1-to-1 environment in terms of computing, students will have more access and more experiences to be more prepared for this type of assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. Kelly put a lot of work into it. I especially like Joan pointed out, the comparison between MCAS 1.0 and 2.0, and the demonstration was, I think I had asked in the past about, can we see a sampling of MCAS testing, and that was certainly it right there. So thank you so much for that.
And I didn't answer any of the questions correctly, so.
Thank you.
Bookmark them and come back.
One last one. Have you made this presentation to parents? I know a lot will be watching the videotape, because I know Christine, when her role was as assistant superintendent, she did a presentation for parents here. And there were a lot of good questions that came from the parents, especially since this is a new type of testing, and explaining, I'm sure maybe the principals have done it, but how do we communicate this to the parents?
So-
I was just breathing.
In last year and prior years, we have given a parent presentation. The results of MCAS 2.0 were released much later in the year than in the past, so we have not had a parent presentation. So we'll have to discuss that and potentially make that available in the months to come. Some of it is timing in terms of it's on the parents' mind when they get those results.
Mm-hmm.
So the January, February timeframe sometimes misses the mark, but we can look into providing some type of training for parents.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to also say that I think the principals do an amazing job at each of the schools, working with their families and their parent population to provide support in terms of answering questions that they might have, particularly when the information is shared with the parents. And the information now is so readily available on video, which wasn't always the case when we did these kinds of presentations. So much like the speaker series, some can attend, but we want to make sure that everybody can access it through, the use of technology. So having this now up as a link is really bringing this into their homes when they're able to find the time to watch it. So I think just like the test has morphed, so has the way in which we've been sharing some of the information with parents. And again, a nod to the principals. It's gone back and forth over the years. What's the most effective way to engage the parents? I think there's a lot of confidence from the parents in terms of the information that's shared, either through this kind of presentation and revisiting it on tape, or through the information that comes from the principals.
Yep.
So, and the teachers are always willing to share too when parents ask and
Like
have
Greg
questions.
said, it's very timely. It's either
Yeah.
when the parents get the actual results, or it's when the testing's going to start. Because then
Right.
there's a big buzz about, oh, MCAS is coming up. So it's kind of a lull. It's not really in parents' minds right now.
That's a good question.
You have to wait and see if it bubbles up and parents start asking for it. And then that's when you really want to respond to that. But this time myself, it's kind of a lull time for MCAS. But we certainly appreciate the presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Spreading that in for my seat.
Too scary.
I think it's scary over there.
Yeah, I'm going to move over here and keep.
My coat.
I just moved on.
Oh, we have another.
One more, but I can deliver it from here.
Who's presenting?
Budget.
Next item on our agenda, approval of grants and donations.
Madam Chair, we actually had wonderful presentations by both Principal Whitten and Principal Carson in past school committee meetings, but as is practice, we need to officially accept these generous donations. I think it's very fitting that we visit both of these tonight. given that we'll be talking about budgets for this upcoming school year. And not only we appreciate and look forward to receiving support from the PTO and NEF, but also grants from community members. And just to refresh our memories, the 9/11 grant is actually in memory of those who lost their lives on September 11th, offered through Harvard Pilgrim, and it's through the generous work of our parent community that we are able to receive these kinds of donations, because Harvard Pilgrim does offer that to its employees to bring a school forward, and that's what happened in this case. Just a reminder, it's yoga mats. So kids get moving, and we're happy to hopefully approve the donation for $1,000.
Do you need separate motions?
We do not. I'll just move into the second one. Jen spoke very enthusiastically about this. It sounds like it's a wonderful opportunity for students to engage in some cultural awareness through this grant opportunity. And Jen, I think you did, I don't know if you want to add anything from last month, but we didn't accept the donation at that time. So wanted to bring this forward for an official
Thank you.
acceptance.
I can share at sharing time if you want
Fine.
to do that. Don't take away my one sharing thing.
We didn't script it.
Happy to. So, a motion?
I'll motion that we accept the Harvard Pilgrim Community Spirit 9/11 mini grant in the amount of $1,000 to Z School, and the Mass Cultural Council STARS grant in the amount of $3,600 to Lincoln Street School.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you.
And we do, as always, just a reminder, send notes of appreciation on behalf of the school committee from our office out to them.
Very nice, thank you.
We move into old business. Chapter 70 discussion is coming back. I delayed the letter. As mentioned last month, Southborough has already signed, the Region School Committee has already signed. I was hoping to hear a little bit more, because I know this was discussed at the MAS conference. But
And Mr. Kane was the representative, basically on behalf of more than one committee this year. I think that we did distribute some information about the presentation at the last month, including a list of school districts that has gone forward to suggest to the legislative branch that really we do need some reform when it comes to Chapter 70, and the essence of this letter is about familiar topics that we not only talk about here within school committee, but at the town level, and that is simply fully funding circuit breaker. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the budget presentation tonight. We're down to 65% from 72% reimbursement on circuit breaker. That's very, very critical reimbursement funding for us. And also, looking at health insurance, and while it may not be a cost that we bear directly in our budget as a K-8, it definitely has an impact on the funding that's available to us through the town. And so really, they truly are familiar discussions that we've had here. And also when the town brings together the legislative folks at the town hall, this is always something that we move forward as a school committee and organization to suggest that they really do need to look into this. And that's what this letter really does suggest, that we too want them to move forward and take some action on reform in terms of Chapter 70 funding.
So, I welcome some feedback from my fellow committee members. Is this something we should move forward with? It's the same letter that was in our packets last month?
It is. And I do have a copy again of the 3-point special education EL, which we talked about, our increasing EL population, and also health insurance. I would recommend or request that we put our support behind this initiative. It's something that we've looked at the state level. The state authorized a committee to be formed, and there have been some significant recommendations that are just languishing at the state level. We know from our representatives that hearing from constituents really has an impact on where some of these committee outcomes go in terms of action and implementation. But again, that's, something that the committee can
I agree with Christine. I think when we've had the legislators here, or when they have hosted a joint meeting at the town hall in Northborough, they've always said they want to hear from us. Sometimes we may think that it goes into dead mail, but I think that they do sort through those and they see that. That helps to give them the support what their towns really need. And I think it would be very beneficial to send that, and also to support the, the other two boards that did it, to show that, that we feel that this is very important to us, especially the cuts that are happening, because we need, we need those funds and not to go into deficit. Lower, it should be increasing as prices on everything, inflation and everything.
Absolutely, so that's your motion?
Okay. Yes, I move that we send the letter on the Chapter 70 to our legislators.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor? Great.
So,
And
Madam
this
Chair,
evening-
can we sign this at the end when we take a picture?
Sure. Okay.
It's picture-taking night.
I won't leave without signing.
Wasn't informed prior.
Thank you.
It was last month, but I didn't have enough to take the picture, so we're moving it forward.
Okay, next item on the agenda is superintendent's report to the committee. We have enrollments.
We do have enrollment, and it's interesting to note that this is a critical discussion point when we're preparing any type of preliminary or our final recommended budget. What you have in front of you are our current enrollments, and on the backside, just a quick look does suggest that we are in all cases, our class size range, albeit we're very close at grade 3 and in grade 2, as we know, we've discussed that. As you'll hear from my preliminary budget discussion, we are at a very interesting point in terms of deciding what our staffing model is going to be like next year. As we know, enrollments are affected by, positively so, our class size policy. We are in our second year of implementation of that policy. And part of that policy was to give parents who had been redistricted because they were new arrivals to the community an opportunity to return to their neighborhood school, and for those who have siblings to remain in the school that they're in, or to move both or a combination thereof to the neighborhood school. Those requests have gone out earlier than last year. We sent them out during the winter break, and we will have all of the responses, the replies, we hope, by January 19th, in plenty of time for our budget conversations on the 23rd. And those are going to be very critical in determining what the staffing model will be like for next year, particularly in those areas where we're very close to the max on the class size. So any kind of movement out of or into a neighborhood school could impact the staffing model for next year. Again, for tonight, the conversation with respect to the budget is not specific to any staffing, because quite frankly, that information is going to be very critical for us. And so we're just being very watchful and very much looking forward to those numbers on the 19th.
So I know on the back, on the side of the enrollments that have future projections, the actual enrollment on here is as of December 14th, 2017.
Right. It was taken before we went on break.
So fiscal year 18 projection, June 22nd, 2017.
So we're tracking,
This is what it was as opposed to what it is?
no, so this hasn't changed. This is the same numbers we always present. So there's no projections on here for FY19.
Okay.
So what this does is it tracks where we are versus where we thought we would be in June. That's what this model does.
Okay, so
So-
those were all of,
Those are current,
those were projections
June.
from this past June.
Right, right.
So this is what you thought we would be at, and then above is what we are actually at.
Actually, yeah, right. So when we begin to talk about staffing in our discussions in subcommittee, we will have those numbers, and we will be looking at projections based on actual numbers for FY19, which will drive staffing discussions at that point. We have preliminarily looked at these numbers, and quickly I came to appreciate that any significant shift of 5 or 6 students who, let's say, would have been placed out of district, out of the neighborhood school district of Lincoln Street, and Lincoln and Z were particularly capped early on. If we have parents who want to move back to their neighborhood school as the option allows, that's going to shift our staffing model pretty significantly, especially if they're grade 2 and grade 3s. And the challenge with that then will be, what does that leave, let's say, Peasley or Proctor, where they're leaving to go to in terms of class size numbers? And quite frankly, it's a significant number this year, given the number of folks that moved in the summer. And it could well be that it still leaves Peasley with needing the same number of teachers, and then shifts Lincoln Street to needing more, because we could be at that critical shift point. So while we've been talking about a lot of scenarios, it's impossible to predict until we get that information from parents.
I'm finding it very difficult to find at any class levels that are less than what was projected.
Right.
In almost every instance.
Because we had 60
Every
kids
school-
move in over the summer. We had 60 folks moving in, and as luck would have it, impossible to predict, grades 2 and 3 were really the most significantly populated or requested grades. And so, it's interesting also to look at what happened here and look at the NESDEC projections. So NESDEC's projections had us, I think, peaking next year in some of those grades, when in fact I think we did this year.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over this summer. I will say that, we saw an increase at the kindergarten level because of folks moving in, a critical number, really, moving in this summer. NESDEC had us projected at 176, and our actual numbers in kindergarten are 140. So next year, for example, they have us projected at 159. So if we track as we do with NESDEC's numbers, we come in typically lower than a NESDEC number, particularly at the K and 1 level. So with that in mind, those kindergarten numbers are going to be also very critical for us, because that's going to provide some information about what model we embrace, whether it's a half or a full day, a blended model, and again, staffing. I do want to point out something that I think is going to be a conversation we're going to have more time with, but something that I think we need to explore more fully. We are coming to a place in our enrollment projections which has significant implications for our budgeting process, and that is, we are staffed at a point where we cannot go any lower. So for most of the grade sections, we have 2 teachers. And in all likelihood, what has happened is our budgets have been, I want to say, positively impacted because we've had shifts in our enrollments. And so we're going to be coming to at a point where right now we're looking at 2, probably in most grades, as we are already, across the board in our K-5s, which will not give us a lot of flexibility in terms of seeing any relief in the budget, because we're looking at attrition in grades as we move on. And that's going to have a stabilizing impact on our consistent growth factor on our budget. And with that, then, I think at some point I would offer that we may want to have a more in-depth conversation about what does that imply and what does that look like for the future. NESDEC is projecting, and our actual numbers show that consistent number with some dips will remain until 2025. And if we look at our actual numbers and we progress those through the grades, we see that playing out with our own actual numbers, kids enrolled now. The only variable is kindergarten, and maybe something like we experienced last year, which was a definite spike in enrollments, not projected anywhere. And so that gives us an opportunity to have conversations about the implications of that on budget and on staffing in our schools.
So when kindergarten registration? Is it
Now,
this month?
next week, right? I think.
Monday, starting Monday. Mhm.
So the good news is, when we have a chance to talk about what does the redistricting impact look like on budget and staffing and enrollments and so forth, we'll also have the K numbers. So we purposely chose the 23rd for our subcommittee meeting because we'll have all of that. And that will then move us forward to the recommended budget in February.
Questions?
Besides saying that, we had an increase of new move-ins in the summertime, if you don't have it now, but if you could have the number for our operational subcommittee, how many new students overall have we had?
Sure, yeah, we have.
From September to January, the end of January?
We definitely have
That'd
that.
be
I don't have it with me,
interesting to
but we have it.
Okay.
Because we had some move-outs, too. So, I know one year we did an analysis of how many eighth graders moved to Algonquin from both communities, and it was very interesting, because in this particular year, we had 100% of Melican students moving on to Algonquin, but it wasn't the same. That number did not represent the same students who were in those seats in eighth grade at Melican, because we had an equivalent number of move-outs and move-ins. So it was 100%, but it wasn't the same 100% of the population that, we took a snapshot of in the eighth grade.
Or was there a net increase between September and now?
In our budget,
K to 5, yeah.
well, there was a net increase as of September, and we haven't had significant move-outs, so I would assume that, I think that it's still a net increase at the K-5 level.
But we can certainly report that back.
Yes.
At our February school committee meeting, because
Okay.
that would be valuable information about from September
Right.
through January.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on enrollment? So moving on to fiscal year 18 monthly general fund expenditure report.
At this point, no significant variances to report. And again, we are keeping a very watchful eye over this budget. And Matt, in his second solo budget presentation, right? This is the second time? Yep. Is absolutely getting very familiar with the ins and outs of our budget. So
Did you have
happy
a
to have
question
him.
or a motion?
Motion.
Excellent.
I move that we accept the FY 2018 budget, the monthly general fund expenditure report as of December 31st, 2017, until audited.
Second.
Other questions, comments, discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you.
Thank you.
And our fiscal year 19
Budget
Budget
goals, we'll revisit them again in a moment
Okay.
as part of the budget discussion. And also in the packet is the budget calendar. Thank you, Joan and Patty and Greg. and Matt. We all attended the financial trend monitoring presentation. It was incredibly informative. I do have extras available for distribution. I think it guided a lot of our conversations. I know Sue might like one. And gave us a great snapshot of our budget within the greater context of the town. That's so noted, as well as our, I think our October meeting should be, no, it hasn't been updated, it was already in the packet, but we are meeting on the 23rd, on Tuesday.
And I'd also like to say that, for those that were not present at that meeting, that there were a lot of good accolades going between the town, John Codere, the town administrator, and also giving a lot of thanks to Christine and her administrative staff for the wonderful collaboration going through with the different capital projects and, where they want to go, and seeing that we're all working together and trying to assist each other as much as we can.
Thank you. I'm attempting to get a date set early for our meeting with financial appropriations. And I had requested that we get that date as soon as possible. I know that it's something we all, we attend, and everyone likes to try to attend, because it's an outstanding Saturday morning, digging deeply into our budget. And so I'm hoping that we have that date very soon, and I'll get that out to everybody once that's scheduled.
Do we have a fiscal year 19 preliminary budget presentation?
We do, and I've given you most of it in the conversations with enrollment, so you do have a handout Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Nope. Hello. Yep. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. It is very early in the new year to be presenting our budget and having final numbers that will help move our recommended budget along to town meeting in April. And so this evening, what I really do want to share with everyone is the kinds of conversations we're having and about the realities, the assumptions that we're making as we're moving more closely into our recommended budget, which will be presented in February. So this evening, what we'll be sharing is really just some highlights in terms of the conversations and what helps guide our work as we move forward with the FY19 budget. I want to extend a thank you and great appreciation to our administrative team. We have some very excited and in-depth conversations about all that we need to bring to our students an extremely powerful educational experience at each of our K-8 schools here in Northborough. And we do spend hours talking about what the budget landscape looks like, what our staffing might look like, all of the kinds of things that we talk about that have to do with curriculum and instruction and assessment, so that we can continue to provide opportunities for growth and achievement for all students in our schools. This should look very familiar to everyone. It's sort of embedded in our websites everywhere, and it's very much a part of the work that we embrace each and every day in our schools. It is our vision and mission statement, and I think we saw a great example of migrating towards thinking critically and solving problems, and in this case with the Mcas, but certainly would not have been possible had the town and the schools not continued to support our growth and implementation of our technology plan that was developed many years ago. Certainly we would not have looked at that kind of delivery of assessment without the continued funding of that line item, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in December, actually early October, I think we voted our budget goals for this year, and they look very similar because they are guiding principles that help provide direction for all of the work. We talk each and every school committee meeting about our class size policy, maintaining class sizes within our recommended range to the extent possible is very critical and very important to us. Again, there's a lot of information that's forthcoming within the next 2 weeks that will help us meet that goal and help us then develop our budget and staffing model based on that. Meet the needs of all learners with instructional models that are research-based and reflect best practices. This is sort of a transitional goal from us from last year to this year. Last year we talked a lot about the social, emotional, behavioral supports that we needed in our schools, as well as having conversations in previous years about providing adequate staffing to meet the growing needs of our student and varied needs of our student population. In this case, we're focusing our work, given that we do have that staffing model well in place, that we spent multiple years trying to build and successfully have done so. We're looking at supporting their work through professional development and making sure that our curriculum resources and our practices are research-based. Each of the presentations that we've heard so far in terms of school improvement plans really reference this in their presentations. Certainly they all talked about utilizing programs to help develop behavioral supports for our students, for all students, and to build a good sense of community and social acceptance for all within the schools. And it's very much a joy to hear the ways in which that's taking place at each of our schools. I also have no doubt that as we listen to the remaining school improvement plans, Jen's is coming up, as well as Sue Witten's, we're going to hear other opportunities for that to take place and to support these two goals. We also look to our work within our operational budget, but continue to work very closely with the town to help support our capital plan, and also to look for ways in which we continue to improve safety for all students and capitalize on energy efficiencies. I know Mrs. Crest is smiling because she has a sunny face, sunshine on her face, because we have embraced the notion of moving to phase 2 in our solar feasibility study, which has exciting prospects for us, going green and hopefully not only environmentally, but saving some money along the way too to support the budgets. And safety is always first and foremost. We do have some items on the capital plan that address safety to some extent. We're hopeful that we're going to receive some information soon about the boiler, and that's about safety for all students. And we do have some items that we've spent considerable time talking about over the last years, and that is, upgrading our security systems in the schools with changing out our key access for all buildings, cameras and alike, which also makes our building safer for all. Again, we are aligned, as Greg mentioned, with the curriculum frameworks and continue to do phenomenal work at the building level with our teams of teachers through our administrators and with central office support. Most recently, we talked about the science framework and the investment that we made in the resources to support the change in the science frameworks, the next generation science standards. We also are concerned with meeting state benchmarks in district educational technology and funding goals identified in the technology implementation plan. We heard a little bit about that being actualized through the assessments, the new assessment model. This is just a quick snapshot. I think it's important for the community to appreciate that the budget just doesn't happen in 1 month. The budget begins as soon as we start the new fiscal year, and we start expending the year we're in. We start thinking about the year that's coming up. And this is actually our budget process, and we've moved quickly through early preliminary discussions in September onto capital planning and improving a capital plan that could provide some collaborative support to the town so that we can be partnering with them as they learn how much money is available for very significant projects. So having done that early on in the year has made us a partner with them as they've looked at their financial health. We've moved on to preliminary budget submissions of significant requests for items that may not have been in the FY18 budget, moving through to December and January. We find ourselves in January talking about preliminary budgetary drivers, and then meeting again to finalize those numbers, moving on to the recommended presentation of the FY19 budget in February, on February 7th at our school committee meeting, and then the public hearing in April and town meeting. This year, we are looking at a level services budget. Not level funding, but level services, which implies providing the same high quality of instructional support and teaching and learning experiences for our students. Level services budget does not mean we are stagnant. We have had technology fortunate for the last 4 years. There were years where we had reductions significantly in our technology line item. But over the last 4 years, we've had sustained funding that has allowed us to move closer to our goal of device ratio of 1-to-1 at grades 3 through 8 and 2-to-1 at grades K2. Next year, we will realize 1-to-1 with all mobile devices, not just devices, but all mobile devices at Melkin. I think that's the target year. And so we've accomplished that goal, which was fairly significant, particularly since we had tech reductions before that. So we've caught up and we've moved forward. And again, it's a lot of great work by a lot of wonderful people who are very much invested in our school district and in our students. The staffing clearly needs to support our student enrollments. And again, it's early on in the process. These next 2 weeks of information is very critical for this process. We made an investment last year, a very successful investment in our students, and we were fortunate that we were able to move forward with some of this through budget, combination of budget and grant writing. And we know that any program that begins needs time to develop and grow, but in our first year, it has been very positively embraced by our teachers who are involved in these, our clinical workers who are involved in these programs, the students who are enrolled in these programs, and the parents. We are anticipating that we will have enrollment in all of these programs next year, and so we are maintaining our investment and providing level service to continue to support these programs. One of our goals, of course, is to see the students blossom and grow within these programs through the supports that we're able to provide, but also to keep them close at home and heart and keep them in our district. And that has done well this year. I want to applaud the staff who were pioneers and the administrators who really got behind this initiative, moved it forward, and continued to provide the support for these programs to grow. And then we have our technology goals that will continue to be realized through this level service budget. What are some of the major factors that we are considering as we look at our final budget numbers for FY19? We have increased staffing costs that every district realizes. We successfully negotiated, thank you Peter Olson as being one of the many presidents that we met with through this process, the contracts, and except for minor edits and small incremental cost factors, the most significant cost increase was a 2% cost of living allowance. I would say that this year, as we look at budget numbers, that number never is 2% because of steps and lanes and changes, but it's as close to that as I've seen over the last 7 years. So we're very appreciative of the partnership that we enjoy with our teachers. Increased costs in student support services. One of the continued concerns that we have is increased service costs related to our supports for all students. We know that we've developed these specialized programs to continue to keep our students in-house, and we've been able to do that. What's very difficult is to interpret what the budget might have been had we not had these programs in place. But this is, again, something that we've talked about each and every year, and we want to be able to provide what all students need within our budget and staffing model. We've had minimal employee shifts. Basically, we've had very few retirements this year, which is great. We'll have the same crew with us next year to some extent, but what that also means is that where we've actually realized some savings in the budget because of retirements, that in fact is not something that we're seeing this year. So we have to take that into consideration. I would also say that one of the things that's been really helpful is to have active dialogues about how we can sometimes redeploy the human resources that we have within our school district. And so it's not uncommon for our staff to apply for positions that we have open within the district that allows us then to retain and maintain that high quality level of staff. Certainly staff that are familiar with us, but still use staff to fill positions that might become available. We noticed this particularly in the area of technology, which has allowed us not to then have an increase in the budget, but really just redeploying the resources, the human resources that we have in district. Anticipated enrollment projections. Again, we see that there may be a continued shift downward in enrollments, and that has tremendous implications for some of our budgetary line items. I wanted to move forward with a discussion about grant revenues this year. It is something that we in 7 years, I don't think we've had a discussion at the budget process about grants. We have about $850,000 worth of costs that are currently on grants. And those grants can be federal grants, state grants, or grants that come through some other source, like the Metro West Health Center. One of the challenges that we will have is that grant is going to sunset next year, and that grant brought in $202,000. We have a choice. It either impacts the district all at once, or we gradually gravitate to transition some of that needed cost onto operational, because the grant will go away. The great things about grant is it gives us sort of venture capital, seed money to grow and develop new programs, but ultimately then it becomes a cost reality for the operational budget. In this case, this year, we received funding from approximately 5 or 6 grants, most of them federal grants. We saw a decline, not a drastic drop, but each year it's been declining. And so we have a choice. We either lose those valuable positions or move that into the operational budget. And this is going to become an area that I'm very concerned about, and we'll want to talk a little bit more about that. We've been successful by being mindful of this shift and have been able to move slowly, and when there's an opportunity, positions onto budget without having a negative or a spike impact on our budget numbers. But this is going to be something that we need to be very watchful over. How can we address some of this? At some point, I know we've had this in policy, we've had a discussion about revisiting our facility rental fees. They have not changed for at least 10 years, if not more. And so revisiting what that might look like through a revised policy and a presentation to the policy subcommittee for consideration, because that's where we capture that facilities rental use language, including what we charge. We're hoping to move that forward. I know Matt's working on that, and that will happen this year through policy. If we adopt it, then that may give us some additional revenues next year, and they come into our revolving account. We use those funds to offset some facilities and maintenance repairs, and we also use those funds to help offset the operational budget in the way of security upgrades and things like that. This is not a popular discussion, and I was kind of nervous when I typed it in, but we have to have this conversation. It has been 9 or so years, 7 years. I think maybe there was a milk conversation in 7 years that I'm familiar with. And there has been no increase in our food related services, products. And whether we do or do not, it's time to revisit this and take a look at where we are. So I've asked Carl Parson, who is our food service director, and Matt to partner to do an analysis for us to take a look at. What is our cost been? What have our revenue receipts look like over the years? Is our average meal cost? Where are we in relationship to neighboring districts? Not suggesting we are or we aren't going to have an increase, but we need to have the conversation. That has a potential offset. If the budget, if the cafeteria is running in the red at the end of the year, that is offset by any operational budget revenues that are necessary, because we cannot have a zero balance. And so that is another sort of impact on the operational budget that we haven't talked about often, but we need to, because we don't know how much that is each year. And with available funding at the end of the year, we hope there's enough to cover that. As we watch through it, it means that if we're starting to see that there is going to be a deficit, then we have to look at freezing some of the line items, because there has to be an offset. I think Kyle is doing a wonderful job at trying to bring in exciting new menu options that kids want to eat, and that's always a challenge as a parent. I'm sure you know that. What they want to eat today is not what they want to eat tomorrow. Circuit breaker, we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about special ed earlier. This is how we've been using circuit breaker. We've been using it very wisely. And that is, we do not expend in the year we receive receipts. We bank a year so that when we're building next year's budget, we actually know how much we have to be able to spend to offset special ed costs. So we may look at the operational budget and look at the special ed line item, but that is not including another $713,000 or the $500,000 on grant funding. So what circuit breaker does is it reimburses a foundation amount at a certain percent. This year, the foundation amount was $42,000. So we had to spend $42,001 before we were eligible per event to receive any circuit breaker. The circuit breaker number is not set until sometime in the summer, after the governor's budget is finally passed, and now everyone has a chance to look at circuit breaker. So where we are positioned at this time is next year, our special education costs that are in the operational budget will be offset by the receipt of $713,215, which we are getting this year based on 17's expenditures. So we never spend the year that we're in. We bank it, which is a very prudent thing to do. If you remember last year, in one of our expenditure report discussions, we had to dig into circuit breaker in the year that we weren't planning to spend it. So we actually had to dig into this year's receipts because we had an unexpected increase in sped costs and special ed placements. And that's why we want to have money in the bank. That's our somewhat reserve fund in case there's a critical event with special ed. And then we have reductions due to shifts in enrollments like we talked about earlier with the redistricting. So there's a lot in play in the next 2 weeks. Our budget in 18 is $23,445,017. We always ask, well, what's the target range? Our target range is really what we need. But what we need is also dependent upon the support and the funding that we'll receive from the town. So it's a very symbiotic relationship right now and a very positive relationship. And so at the financial trend monitoring and at different conversations, we did get a snapshot in terms of what our range was in terms of town funding and town feasibility to fund our budget in terms of an increase. Right now, we're looking at a 3.61% max cap, which is around a 24.286 budget. So I thought this was interesting information to share. I will suggest to you that based on very, very preliminary numbers, we are over that number. So when we meet again on the 23rd, we'll be having discussions about where are we in relationship to this number. I will share with you that based on the projections that we've seen, 58% of any increased dollar amount where we are right now on very preliminary numbers without all of that other information in play, 58% of that is employee-related costs, increased costs. 41% was increased special education, student support. And we use it always as special education, but it's not. Student support is a wealth and breadth of much-needed, valued supports that our students receive on a day-to-day basis. So it's the student support umbrella, and that is increasing right now at 41. If we do the math, that leaves about a 1% for all the other line items, and that's where we get to the level service piece. So that's where we are right now. Be happy to entertain some questions. I'm really looking forward to the 23rd.
I'm going to jump ahead and go right to my favorite subject.
Solar?
All right, any potential possible savings from solar reflected in the preliminary budget number for fiscal year 2019?
No.
Okay, that's
My
it.
projection, though, I'd like to...
And that's fine, that's very...
2020.
That's conservative.
Yeah.
That's being very conservative, and I just wanted to ask.
Yep. Thank you.
I did understand, however, that coming up at town meeting, before one of the committees, they're changing the lighting here at Melican, which I believe that the fund is going to pay, they're going to pay for the lighting, but doesn't the district, don't we pay the electric bill?
We pay the electric bill.
So will we see any deduction on the electric bill because of the new lighting that is supposedly going to be recommended at town meeting?
So I can only suggest that when the high school went to sort of LED lighting, there was an energy efficiency savings. I think it's early to project. We do know, though, at Z School, with or without the boiler, what we're going to see is a significant reduction in the heating and the electricity costs because of the contract for upgrades that took place several years ago, and it's in its sunset phase. So the last end of the contract for energy upgrades at that time is about to sunset, so we're going to realize some significant savings there. And then, of course, if we move forward with a new boiler, which we're, hopeful, we'll see some savings there as well.
But again, those were not reflected in the preliminary? Okay, good, thank you.
No.
Good, gives us a little bit of wiggle room.
Which is great, because if we get
Yes.
some savings, we'll have some additional funding.
Exactly, thank you. All right, committee members, Joan?
Christine, if you could go to slide 7, counting that one as number 1.
Sure.
Because it just ties into my comment, it's not a question, ties into the enrollments that you were talking about at the previous, and it's a previous item on our agenda.
This one?
Yes. I would just like to say that when you, bullet number 2 and bullet number 3 go hand in hand very much. If we want to have that wonderful programming, but we want it to be effective and beneficial for all students, from the therapeutic programs to the language-based classrooms to the co-teaching to, students who have English as a second language, we have to keep the numbers where we have them. Some people will say, well, we can add another 5. What's another 5 going to do? Another 5 students can do an awful lot into the classroom. Where there's less communication one-on-one with the teacher, though I'm sure our teachers strive to do it as the best as they can and work as hard as they can. But I see those 2 bullets going hand in hand, because if you increases the enrollment numbers per classroom, these programs are going to lose their effectiveness and how they can be the most optimal and the most beneficial. So I would just like to thank you for the wonderful presentation and early into the budget season, and I think this will be good drivers as we go into our operational subcommittee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
When we started the new support programs,
Sure.
the therapy program, didn't we experience some savings by keeping kids in district? Is
We
there
would-
any number on?
That was one of those intangibles that I
Yeah.
had suggested that it would be great if we could actually track that. So the best we have, I think, are the conversations that have been taking place about whether or not we have the programs in place to support the needs of all students. And so I'm sure if Marie Allen was here, she would suggest that there have been some cost savings, not specifically identified in dollars, but based on conversations with students who have remained in district because these programs were in place, or would have perhaps needed to go elsewhere. So I would say yes, we have, and that was one of our investments. Sometimes, to Joan's point, we appreciate that we made an investment, and investments pay out over time. Okay, it's a not immediate return on our investment, but I would suggest that yes, we could probably support the fact that we've already seen a return on our investment. Thank you for
Yeah, and
asking.
of course, there's things you can't. There's both the time, there's a longitudinal component, and then there's all the other value add that comes with having that type of collaboration and cross-pollination of staff and whatnot, that
So I
you can't
appreciate the
measure in
question.
dollars, but
Right.
I was just curious about the,
I would suggest that our investment not only has returned positive gains with the students, which is most important, in having them perform well in school and be in our schools, but that translates probably into some definite savings of dollars because they're still with us in our community. Thank you. here for you. I must have 5 of my clickers here.
Next item is the fiscal year 19 capital improvement plan, as has been previously presented and discussed. Do you have any feedback from our illustrious town administrator as to whether it will be supported or any feedback?
Other than it's still definitely one of the top considerations for funding this year. And I'm pleased with that. The healthy dialogue is still continuing.
Fantastic. So I would suggest we revisit this along with the operational budget next month. Unless there's opposition. No education policy at this time. Policy development and or distribution. So I think, I was looking at the school committee policy in regards to the formulation of policies, and original first read of a draft is supposed to be, should be done at the local meeting and then go to combine. But we do have another combine coming up, and it was expected that we would discuss these policies again at combine, correct? The ones that were brought up at the last combine?
Correct. And there was a request to bring them to this meeting as well.
It was, and I'm glad we did, because our policies do differ in a number of different ways from the other districts. Although I think that the new religious observance, the new religious observance policy is great. I would expect that to go into an A section. I didn't have any questions or concerns about that one. I guess I should go in order. Let me go in order. So second read for B100, the annual policy review. Was there any discussion or comments in regards to that policy? So second read, does this mean we can approve?
Without any comments.
Okay. Motion to approve? No?
I move that we approve annual policy review B100.
And second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Now, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit here. Now we can discuss the new religious religious observance policy. I like it. Members have any questions or discussion about the potential new policy?
Is this the same as what was presented at the combined meeting, or has it been revised since then?
It has not, because combined policy hasn't met, and I think there was wait time for anyone through the chair of the combined, which is Kathleen at this point, right? Pelechko, I think comments were to be sent to her, and then it was going to go back to policy just to revisit whether or not edits have been made and suggestions have been made for changes. And then it would go back to combined policy for a second read at this point. So this is not the last time that we have to take a look at this, and by far, it's not the last time for folks to submit changes for consideration.
Fantastic.
Was there a combined policy meeting scheduled? Is there one that I missed the date on, or? next one?
I believe.
Is it March, or?
There was one canceled.
Okay, I just didn't know if we had one that's coming up, or we just haven't scheduled one yet, that this is gonna go back to.
Yes.
Which is great, and it can be discussed there as well. The more discussion, the better, in my opinion. So any other questions or comments on the new religious observance policy? Okay, so the next one was J350, substance abuse prevention and education policy. And specific to Northborough, we have a policy J160, which I think it's so much overlap to J350 that for Northborough, can we eliminate J160 and just include anything that's not covered by the new J350, include into J350 what might be included in our J160 that's not already in here?
Does anybody have a copy of that one?
Yeah, we don't
There
have
was one
copies.
policy that we were going to
Wasn't this,
rescind, but we said we were going to hold it until this, because there's some stuff that was included in that. I don't know if that's the number you're referring to or not. I know there was one that we were going to rescind, whether or not it's that one or a different one.
Okay, good.
I can't recall.
Potential to consolidate, that's always nice.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
good. Then we can hold
It's sensible.
discussion, certainly, absolutely, because I think that might be.
Because I think last time there was a rescinded one, or we were going to, but then we held off.
Okay.
Was this done by legal? Is this
Yes,
based
so
off
I
a new
do-
regulation or something?
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Keith, for bringing that up.
Yep.
The reason this is moving forward is because the language was fairly succinct and consistent with the requirements of the MGL legislation. And so it is always at the discretion of any of the three committees to do with each policy what they choose, whether they want to morph this into their existing language or whether we want to create a new language. This one is specifically as defined by this document, prescribed by law, and one that we have to have in place. You'll know probably a departure from this is the language about SPURT. We're still having those conversations. And just an aside, we met with Lori Pardee this week. It was our combined district that encouraged the legislative branch to include language in this MGL requirement, the opioid bill, that would allow districts to submit a waiver request from the SPURT requirement. And more and more superintendents are now speaking out about the whole SPURT assessment and whether it's meaningful or meaningless, and whether it was just something that the legislative branch mandated to have something in there about assessing students. We feel that one of the cornerstones of addressing this issue is building relationships with our students, and we at all of our schools do an amazing job with some of the programs that they've developed in building one-on-one relationships with students. And we have taken and did take a very strong position that that's the intent of this. We do that in many more ways, by mentorship, by conversations, by getting to know the students far beyond the 7-minute assessment test that we would be required to administer at 2 grade levels at a cost that we would bear, but at a greater cost of not being able to share any meaningful information because the results of the assessment are completely confidential and cannot be shared with anyone. That's including parent or the health providers. So we are going to be applying for a waiver from that SPURT and see where we get.
If we need to have,
Is that the opt-out provision?
Well, it's beyond, and the opt-out is exactly a piece of that. You as a child or a parent could opt out.
I mean,
We're saying we're opting out as a district,
Collectively.
collectively.
fantastic.
Well, could we have legal look at our existing substance abuse policy and see number 1, is there anything conflicting between the two? And number 2, can we dissolve that? Can we, in fact, consolidate them? I mean, it's kind of hard for us.
So to me,
Yeah.
the biggest change is this is about drug abuse
Oh.
and consumption. This is about education and prevention.
Okay, so maybe they are.
The genesis of the two are very different. This is what's going to happen if you abuse a drug in terms of a punitive kind of, this is how we can be preventative and provide education for all students. And I think that was the real focus of the provision of the bill, the opioid bill, and the reason why they wanted us to provide a new document. And so one of the reasons why this was taken maybe out for conversation or as a policy when we were talking about rescinding it is because the drug abuse piece often is handled in each school's respective discipline policy. So even the health and wellness folks had recommended that we remove it. When the Health and Wellness Committee gets together, they suggested that this might be a policy that is no longer applicable because it looked at the discipline aspects of it, which are covered by student handbooks. And so that was a little bit of a different focus as well. But, yeah, we can certainly, continue the conversation. This isn't a one and done. I would like this to be done somehow in June, whether it's a morphing of it.
Well, it's very doable, especially
need to
since
have
they've
it.
already drafted this. They usually do a good job on the language and just more. Is the other one due for review?
They're all.
We're pretty current right now. This was 2001. It was made in 1970. It was created in 71.
Sounds like it can be like that.
Yeah. Especially, I think it's just timely that we do look at it.
Right,
Regardless
absolutely.
of whether it's
Yeah,
due
if
to
if
be
in
looked at.
fact they're
timely.
complementary, that's fine.
Mhm.
If they're not, then we can revise the old one, or maybe consolidation can be entertained.
It is a good time to review that. So good. I'm glad we're continuing the conversation.
Absolutely.
And thank you for allowing us for us to discuss this evening.
I appreciate the committee's
Thank you.
interest in the policies and developing what's right for each district. It's important.
I love the conversation on the local. Thank you. Any further discussions in regards to policies? Much anticipated audience sharing.
Audience of one.
Out getting gas for the snow blowers.
There's an audience sharing. School is canceled tomorrow. I didn't want to jump ahead here, but in case anyone did not receive the 3-1 calls and email.
In case people weren't asking all day or looking.
I'm sure they were. Yeah.
So we'll go and start with our principals. Dr. Barnhart, do you have an update or anything to share with us this evening?
I certainly have a short sharing for you to revisit a topic that you brought up earlier. The 4 elementary schools will be holding kindergarten registration next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, so January 8th, 9th, and 10th. We are very excited to open our doors to students who will be 5 by August 31st of next year. And we're hoping that as many parents as possible are able to bring their materials in and get children registered, because that does, as Mrs. Johnson mentioned earlier, really impact our decision-making about staffing and programs. So we are hoping that we can get a good handle on the numbers of children who will be joining us in the fall. And then we have our grade 5 chorus and band concert coming up on January 25th at 7 p.m. at Beasley School. We are very excited because this really is their first big performance of the year. So it's definitely been a big change since they started with their lessons in September. So we're very excited. And then just very briefly, the PTO is bringing in 3 different programs, 2 presented by the Discovery Museum. And then our annual visit from Star Lab for grade 5 is coming up this month. And that is always a huge hit with us. So very excited and appreciative to the PTO for those things.
Fantastic, thank you.
I also wanted to thank the committee, as Christine mentioned earlier, for your approval of the STARS grant through the Mass Cultural Council. And the person who came in to present began with us the first day back after vacation. And she ran 2 school-wide assemblies where she really focused on Japanese storytelling. And she had students counting to 10 in Japanese, and really, she had a great command of the audience, and with really no visuals and no kind of props or things. Peter was there. She captured the attention of 250 kids very easily. And today she started her work in the classrooms, working in grades 3 and 4. And she just did a wonderful job. The reason for bringing her in, when I read the description of the program, was her combination of the art of origami with the concept of geometry. And I know when Greg did the presentation on the Mcas, I think all of us are always looking for different ways to bring some of these concepts to light for students in different and engaging ways. And in a 40-minute block in a 3rd grade classroom, she had gone through every kind of triangle. What is a right angle? They made 4 different types of origami figures, and the amount of math instruction that was embedded in that I'm sure the students really weren't even aware of. But I know the teacher was doing a lot of silent cheers with all the concepts that were noted with this instructor today. So we're looking forward to more visits, and there will be a culminating activity or a culminating experience at the end that you'll all be invited to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if feels like we never left for vacation. We started our Wachusett Ski Club yesterday, and the kids had a blast. So that runs for 6 Tuesdays, and again, it was our first one of the year. Kids were very excited, and nobody got hurt, so that's always a bonus. Our basketball teams had a game yesterday, and they had another one today against our crosstown rival Trotter. Both the boys and girls won. Yay. We have another game that we play at Algonquin, which is really nice because then later in the season, the teams get together and they end up playing together in high school. So it's a really friendly rivalry. And last year, the Trotter administrators had to wear Melican shirts because they lost that game. So we're hoping for that later in the season. But it's just fun, and the atmosphere was great. And we have our third math meet next week. So our math team is moving along. And speaking of math, I don't know how many people saw the Telegram and Gazette on the 27th. Andrew Lee is headed to Who Wants to Be a Mathematician Championship. He qualified. He's an 8th grader. He qualified by taking an online assessment. He was one of 4,000 students to take the assessment and one of only 12 to make the cut. So he's one of only 2 8th graders to make it, and he's the youngest ever, and this is the 9th year of the competition. So he's headed to, I think it's San Diego, next week, and he's excited, and we'll see. We wish him the best of luck. Exciting.
Great. I just wanted to give a shout out to Tom Adler and the whole entire custodial staff, especially as we're into these hard winter months that seem to be colder than usual, more snow, faster, and especially the principals working together with the custodians to make sure that the buildings are safe, they're warm, and the sidewalks are cleared for our students and their safety. So I would just give a shout out to Tom Mailer, because I know going through the capital project subcommittee, when Tom made the presentation about the boilers, which are so important, you don't realize it when you see something in the news where schools are canceled because of it being so cold. So it takes a lot, because they have to be here earlier than what teachers and you guys have to, but it's also your coordination with your staff. So thanks, and super thanks for making such a safe environment for our students and teachers also. Thank you.
Very excited. Go back to my most favorite current topic. I saw her in the community. I saw her in the community advocate from December 29th. We made the front page. Northborough, Southborough Public Schools investigate the use of solar energy. A fantastic article. Thank you, Superintendent Johnson, interview, and for spreading the word that we are doing what we can for energy efficiencies.
I actually haven't seen that, so she spent a lot of time chatting, so I'm glad it resulted in something positive.
Front page.
Positive
Front page.
Sharing with the community.
Great story.
That's great.
Thank you. That's it for me.
We have a school calendar for next
Oh.
year. I did bring copies. I know everyone here at the table was part of that conversation. I want to extend deepest appreciation to the Northborough School Committee for taking the recommendation to consider voting a 2-year calendar. So next year's posted online, and also for the teachers and the administrators in being innovative in terms of thinking out of the box a little bit, and in terms of how we can continue to deliver very, very, very much needed PD. Without those days, we certainly wouldn't have an opportunity to collaborate and advance a lot of the initiatives that we have in our district. So we're taking an innovative approach and having a hybrid model for 6 of the hours. And again, good collaboration with our teachers and our Teachers Association. I think this is going to be exciting. It's a pilot. We'll re-examine it next year, and it's going to be sort of a grassroots-supported initiative with teachers having a very critical piece of how this is piloted and what the options will be for professional development. So we do have a 2-year calendar, and we have a voted moratorium on discussions about changes with respect to religious observance until such time as there is a compelling reason to change and revisit it. So thank you. It was an interesting analysis that we conducted over time, but I think the outcome was
Good to
a
have
good
this
one.
discussion.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that the vote has been taken and that's settled. Thank you. Gentlemen?
No school tomorrow.
Thank you. Also, no school January 15th, January 16th, and half day on the 24th.
Ah, 15, 16, 15.
Did I get that right? January
Yeah.
the 15th and the 16th, okay. Any other audience sharing? Personal items, distribution of personnel report is in the packet.
Yep.
I'm sure there'll be more.
Budget,
Budget items to come.
recommended budget.
So future agenda items, recommended budget, Northborough Ed Foundation, will use this for the presence. I'm sure they'll come talk about, when they're here, they can talk about trivia night. The Z School Improvement Plan and PTO presentation. Any other agenda items members wish to see next month or in the committees?
We'll see those policies back.
Policies will be back, yep.
And it was just the enrollment update from September to January, but that could happen at the operational subcommittee also.
Okay, great. Okay, so any other business that needs legally come before the committee? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chairperson, I move that we adjourn the Northborough School Committee open meeting of Wednesday, January 3rd, 2018.
All in favor?
Oh.